9-year-old Fiona Carter, bald from chemotherapy and fighting stage 3 leukemia in a Detroit hospital at 2 a.m., when the pain was unbearable and hope was running out, wrote a crayon letter to the Hells Angels, asking if they'd just ride past my house once so I can hear the engines and feel brave again. And 2 weeks later, when that letter reached Rufus, Red Wolf, McKenna, a road captain who'd lost his own 7-year-old daughter to the same cancer 15 years ago, he didn't send single bike to Mayflower Street in Dearborn Heights like Fiona asked. What he did was unbearable and unthinkable. Before we dive into this story, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city, state or country in the comments below. And if you believe that Fiona Carter, bald from chemotherapy, 73 pounds, fighting stage 3 leukemia with odds stacked against her, showed more courage, then hit that subscribe button right now. Now let's get into the story. Out of the fluorescent-lit silence of Children's Hospital of Michigan's oncology ward came a sound that didn't belong. A 9-year-old girl's whisper cutting through the darkness, asking her exhausted mother a question that would change everything. "Mom, do you think the Hells Angels would ride past our house if I asked them?" And Mrs. Penelope Carter, single mother, working 2 jobs, drowning in medical bills she'd never be able to pay, watching her daughter fight a battle no child should face, looked at Fiona's bald head and hollow eyes, and the IV port in her chest, pumping poison through her veins to kill the cancer that was trying to kill her first, and said the only thing a mother desperate for hope could say, "Baby, I don't know, but we can try." The chemotherapy hit hardest at night. That's when the nausea came in waves, when the pain in Fiona's bones felt like someone was breaking her from the inside, when the exhaustion was so deep that even breathing felt like work. It was 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, and Fiona Carter, 9 years old, 73 pounds, diagnosed with stage 3 acute lymphoblastic leukemia, 8 months ago lay in bed 6 on the 4th floor of Children's Hospital of Michigan, staring at the ceiling tiles she'd memorized, counting them for the 1,000th time because sleep wouldn't come, and the alternative was thinking about dying. Her mother, Mrs. Penelope Carter, slept in the recliner beside the bed, not really sleeping, just resting her eyes between the beeping monitors and the nurse checks and the constant vigilance that came with watching your only child fight for her life. Penelope was 34 but looked 50, the kind of exhaustion that comes from working double shifts as a medical billing clerk, then spending nights in hospital rooms, the kind of worry that carves lines into your face and turns your hair grey at the temples. Fiona's diagnosis had cost her everything. Her marriage, her husband couldn't handle it, left 6 months ago, their savings wiped out by co-pays and experimental treatments, and any semblance of normal life. But she stayed, because that's what mothers do. "Mom?" Fiona's voice was small in the darkness. Penelope's eyes opened immediately. "I'm here, baby. What do you need? Water? Ice chips? Can we watch something? I can't sleep." Penelope grabbed the remote and flipped through channels, looking for anything that wasn't too loud or too bright or too stimulating for a child whose body was being ravaged by poison designed to save her. She landed on a documentary. The screen showed massive men in leather vests, beards and tattoos, riding motorcycles in formation. The narrator's voice, "And the Hells Angels have a long tradition of supporting children in hospitals, escorting sick kids to treatment, and showing up when families need hope." Fiona's eyes dull moments before suddenly focused. "Wait, go back." Penelope unmuted it. The documentary showed bikers visiting a children's hospital, their motorcycles lined up outside, engines rumbling. A little boy in a wheelchair, bald like Fiona, grinning as a massive biker, lifted him onto a Harley for a photo. Fiona sat up slowly, wincing from the movement. "Mom, look at them." "I see them, honey. They look so strong." Her voice was filled with wonder. "Like nothing could hurt them, like they're not scared of anything." Penelope's throat tightened, because her daughter, her brave, beautiful daughter, was terrified every single day. terrified of the treatments, of the pain, of dying, of never getting to grow up and ride the dirt bike that sat unused in their garage back in Dearborn Heights. "They are strong, baby," Penelope said quietly. "That's what motorcycles do. They make you brave." Fiona watched the rest of the documentary in silence, her thin fingers gripping the blanket, her eyes never leaving the screen. When it ended, she looked at her mother with an expression Penelope hadn't seen in months. Hope. "Mom, do you think the Hells Angels would ride past our house if I asked them?" Penelope's first instinct was to say no, to protect her daughter from disappointment, to explain that people like them, poor, struggling, nobodies from Dearborn Heights, didn't get miracles. But then she looked at Fiona's face and saw something she'd been praying for, a reason to keep fighting. "I don't know, baby, but we can try." The next morning, Fiona asked a nurse for crayons and paper. Her hands shook as she drew, not from weakness, though there was plenty of that, but from determination. She drew motorcycles, crude, childlike, beautiful motorcycles with oversized wheels and stick-figure riders. Then, in letters that wavered across the page, she wrote, "My name is Fiona. I am 9 years old. I have cancer. I love motorcycles, but I am too sick to ride mine. Could you just ride past my house once? I want to hear the engines. It would make me feel brave again." She drew a heart at the bottom and signed it. Fiona Carter, Dearborn Heights, Michigan. Penelope watched her daughter fold the letter carefully, address an envelope in that same shaky handwriting. To the Hells Angels, Detroit, Michigan. "Mom, will you mail it?" Penelope looked at the envelope at this impossible request written by a dying child who just wanted to feel strong and felt her heart break and mend at the same time. "Yes, baby, I'll mail it." That afternoon, on her way to work, Penelope dropped the letter in a mailbox on Woodward Avenue. She didn't expect a response. She didn't know if the letter would even reach anyone. But she'd learned something in 8 months of fighting leukemia. Hope doesn't require certainty. Sometimes it just requires asking. And somewhere across Detroit, in a clubhouse off I-94, where men with leather cuts and hard lives gathered, a letter addressed to the Hells Angels was about to land on the desk of a man named Rufus Red Wolf McKenna, a road captain with a grey beard, military tattoos, and a daughter he'd lost to childhood cancer 15 years ago. A man who would read Fiona's words and make a decision that would bring 80 motorcycles to a quiet street in Dearborn Heights. Because the Brotherhood doesn't ignore letters from brave little girls. They answer them with thunder. 2 weeks after Fiona Carter mailed a crayon letter to the Hells Angels, Detroit, Michigan, asking if they'd ride past her house just once so she could hear the engines and feel brave, Rufus Red Wolf McKenna sat in the back office of the Hells Angels, Detroit clubhouse off I-94, sorting through mail that had piled up during a 3-day run to Cleveland, and discovered an envelope addressed in shaky handwriting that made his 52-year-old hands freeze mid-motion because the return address said, "Fiona Carter, age 9, Dearborn Heights," and something in his gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Iraq and 15 years as a road captain, told him this letter was about to change everything. He opened it slowly, unfolded the paper, and saw crayon drawings of motorcycles with oversized wheels and stick-figure riders, and beneath them, words written in letters that wavered across the page like they'd been written by someone too weak to hold a pen steady. "My name is Fiona. I am 9 years old. I have cancer. I love motorcycles, but I am too sick to ride mine. Could you just ride past my house once? I want to hear the engines. It would make me feel brave again." Rufus read it 3 times, his throat tightening with each pass, because 15 years ago he'd held his 7-year-old daughter Sarah in a hospital bed just like Fiona's, watching leukemia steal her breath, her smile, her future, and he'd made a promise to Sarah's memory that if he ever had the chance to help another child fighting what she'd fought, he wouldn't hesitate. And now, a 9-year-old girl in Dearborn Heights was asking the Hells Angels for courage. and Rufus McKenna was about to give her more than she'd ever imagined. He walked into the main clubhouse where 40 Detroit chapter members sat drinking coffee, working on bikes, telling stories, and when Rufus spoke, his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Listen up, I got something." The room went quiet. Rufus held up the letter. This came from a 9-year-old girl named Fiona. She's got leukemia, stage 3. She's asking if we'd ride past her house once so she can hear the engines, because it would make her feel brave. He paused, his jaw tight. She drew us pictures. She thinks we're strong. She thinks we're not scared of anything. Bear Johnson, vice president, 6'5", former Marine with a prosthetic left hand from Fallujah, stood up slowly. "When do we ride?" Rufus looked around the room at men with prison records, military tattoos, scars from bar fights and bike crashes. Men society had written off as criminals and outlaws, and said the words that would mobilize the entire Michigan Hells Angels network. "Saturday morning, 10 a.m., Dearborn Heights. And we're not sending one bike. We're sending every chapter in Michigan." Stitch Martinez, medic, former Army corpsman, soft-spoken man in his 40s who'd stitched up more brothers than he could count, raised his hand. "How many bikes we talking?" Rufus's eyes were steel. "As many as it takes to make a 9-year-old girl believe she's not alone." The room erupted, not in chaos but in purpose. Phones came out. Calls were made. Within an hour, Rufus had contacted Hells Angels chapters in Flint, Grand Rapids, Lansing, Kalamazoo, Ann Arbor. Every chapter gave the same answer. "We're in. How many you need?" By midnight, the count was at 80 bikes, and Rufus sat alone in his office, staring at Fiona's letter, at the crayon motorcycles, at the words, "It would make me feel brave again," and he thought about Sarah, about how she'd asked him once if he thought motorcycles were magic because they made people look so strong, and he'd told her, "Yes, sweetheart, they are," and he picked up his phone and made one more call to Fiona's house. A woman answered, exhausted. "Hello, Mrs. Carter, my name is Rufus McKenna. I'm with the Hells Angels Detroit chapter. We received your daughter's letter." Mrs. Penelope Carter stood in her kitchen in Dearborn Heights at 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, holding a phone to her ear while her heart hammered against her ribs, listening to a man with a deep, gravelly voice say he was Rufus McKenna from the Hells Angels, and they'd received Fiona's letter and wanted to visit tomorrow night to meet her and promised they'd come Saturday. And Penelope's first thought wasn't gratitude or excitement, but terror, because she'd grown up in Detroit being taught that motorcycle gangs were dangerous, that Hells Angels were criminals, that people like her didn't invite men with leather cuts and prison tattoos into their homes. But then Rufus said something that shattered every stereotype she'd ever believed. "Mom, I lost my daughter to leukemia 15 years ago. Her name was Sarah. She was 7. And I made her a promise that if I ever got the chance to help another child fighting what she fought, I wouldn't let them down. So, if it's okay with you, I'd like to meet Fiona and look her in the eye and tell her we're coming. Because I want her to know this isn't charity. It's family." Penelope's throat closed up. She managed to whisper, "Tomorrow night, 7 p.m., we'll be here." When she hung up, she stood in the kitchen for a full minute, shaking, before walking to Fiona's room where her daughter lay in bed home from the hospital for 3 days, weak but stable, and said, "Baby, they got your letter." Fiona's eyes went wide. "The Hells Angels?" "Yeah, they're coming to visit tomorrow, and then Saturday, they're riding past the house." Fiona sat up so fast she winced from the pain. "They're really coming?" "They're really coming." Fiona burst into tears. Not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come when hope breaks through, despair like sunlight through storm clouds. The next night at 7:03 p.m., 3 motorcycles pulled up in front of the Carter house on Mayflower Street, a quiet suburban block where most people drove minivans and worried about property taxes, not leather-clad bikers showing up after dark. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Mrs. Henderson from next door called her husband. There's Hell's Angels in front of the Carter place. Should we call the police? Her husband looked out the window and saw 3 massive men dismounting bikes, removing helmets, and walking toward Fiona's door with the careful respect of people entering a church. "No," he said quietly. "I think we should mind our own business." Penelope opened the door before they could knock. Rufus stood at the front, grey beard, weathered face, leather vest covered in patches, a Hell's Angels death head on the back, military insignia on the front. Beside him, Bear, the 6'5" VP with a prosthetic hand, and Stitch, the medic with kind eyes and a calm voice. "Mrs. Carter?" Rufus extended his hand. "Rufus McKenna, this is Bear Johnson and Stitch Martinez." Penelope shook his hand, her voice shaking. "Thank you for coming. Fiona's in the living room. She's been waiting all day." They stepped inside, these 3 men who'd seen war and prison and violence, who wore cuts that said they lived outside society's rules, and when they saw Fiona sitting on the couch in an oversized pink hoodie, bald head, 4-port scar visible on her chest, holding her crayon letter like a treasure, they all stopped. Because no matter how tough you are, seeing a child fighting cancer breaks something in you. Rufus walked over slowly, kneeled, so they were eye to eye. "Fiona, my name is Rufus. You wrote us a letter asking if we'd ride past your house." Fiona nodded, too nervous to speak. "Well, here's the thing. We don't do small. When you ask the Hell's Angels for courage, we bring it. So, Saturday morning, 10 a.m., we're not sending 1 bike." He smiled. "We're sending 80. Fiona's mouth fell open. 80? 80. From all over Michigan, because you're brave. And brave people deserve backup." Fiona started crying. Penelope started crying. Bear wiped his eyes. Stitch pulled out a small leather patch from his vest, custom-made, pink, with a death head and wings, and handed it to Fiona. "This makes you an honorary little angel. That means you're family now." Fiona clutched the patch, sobbing. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Rufus stood, his voice thick. "Saturday, Fiona. We'll make your whole street shake." And when they left, Penelope stood on the porch, watching 3 motorcycles disappear into the Detroit night, and for the first time in 8 months, she believed her daughter might actually survive this. Friday morning, 24 hours before 80, Hell's Angels were scheduled to shut down Mayflower Street in Dearborn Heights for a 9-year-old cancer patient who'd asked them to ride past her house just once. Rufus McKenna sat in the Detroit chapter clubhouse, making the kind of phone calls that proved Brotherhood wasn't about patches or territory. It was about showing up when someone needed you, even if that someone was a little girl you'd never met who drew motorcycles in crayon and believed bikers were the strongest people in the world. He called the Flint chapter first. "We need 20 bikes Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Dearborn Heights. It's for a kid with cancer." The Flint president didn't hesitate. "We'll bring 25. Grand Rapids. Count us in. 15 bikes. Lansing. We're there. 12. Kalamazoo. 10. Ann Arbor. 8. By noon, the count was at 83 motorcycles, and Rufus had to start turning chapters away because any more and they'd overwhelm the residential street, terrify the neighbors, and defeat the purpose, which wasn't intimidation, but inspiration, not fear, but courage, not showing off, but showing up. But there was one more call he had to make, and this one was the hardest because it involved asking permission from people who had every reason to say no. The Dearborn Heights Police Department. Rufus dialed the non-emergency line and asked for the chief. The dispatcher put him through. "Chief Sullivan." "Chief, my name is Rufus McKenna. I'm road captain for the Hell's Angels Detroit chapter. I'm calling to inform you that tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., approximately 80 motorcycles will be riding through a residential neighborhood in your jurisdiction. We wanted to coordinate with you to ensure public safety." There was a long pause. Then, "Why?" "There's a 9-year-old girl named Fiona Carter on Mayflower Street. She has leukemia. She wrote us a letter asking if we'd ride past her house once because hearing engines makes her feel brave. We're honoring that request." Another pause, longer this time. When Chief Tom Sullivan spoke again, his voice was rough. My niece had leukemia. Emma, she was 6. Didn't make it. Rufus closed his eyes. I'm sorry, Chief. How long you need the street? 1 hour. You gonna be respectful? No burnouts? No revving for show? No scaring people? We'll be silent until we reach her house. Then we'll give her what she asked for. Engines. Loud ones. Sullivan was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll escort you personally. And I'll notify the residents. Anyone gives you trouble, they answer to me. Rufus's throat tightened. Thank you, Chief. Don't thank me. Just make that little girl smile. That afternoon, Dearborn Heights police officers knocked on every door on Mayflower Street, handing out notices. Street closure notice. Saturday, October 14, 10 a.m., 11 a.m. Mayflower Street will be temporarily closed for a community event honoring a pediatric cancer patient. Motorcycle escort provided by local organizations. Please remain on sidewalks and lawns for safety. Mrs. Henderson read the notice and called Penelope immediately. Is this about Fiona? Yes, Penelope said. The Hells Angels are coming. The Hells Angels? Penelope, are you sure that's safe? Mrs. Henderson, they visited us last night. They were the kindest men I've ever met, and they're doing this because Fiona asked them to. There was a pause. Then Mrs. Henderson said something Penelope would never forget. Then I'll be on my lawn with a sign. That night, Fiona couldn't sleep. Not from pain or fear, but from excitement so intense it felt like electricity in her veins. She kept asking her mother the same question. What if they don't come? What if something happens? And Penelope, who'd spent 8 months learning that hope required faith, said, They'll come, baby, I promise. At the Detroit clubhouse, Rufus stood in front of 80 bikers from 6 Michigan chapters and said, Tomorrow we ride for Fiona. Full dress code, American flags, polished chrome. This isn't a rally. This is a ceremony. We're not showing off. We're showing up. And when we reach Mayflower Street, we give that little girl what she asked for, thunder. Saturday morning broke over Detroit with October sunlight, painting the sky orange and gold, and at 9:15 a.m. 80 Hells Angels from 6 Michigan chapters assembled in the parking lot of the Detroit clubhouse off I-94, their motorcycles gleaming chrome and black leather in perfect formation, American flags mounted on sissy bars, cut spotless and pressed. Because today wasn't about riding, it was about honoring a 9-year-old girl who'd written them a crayon letter and believed they were the strongest people in the world, and 80 bikers who'd seen war and prison and violence were determined to prove her right. Rufus Red Wolf McKenna stood at the front, his grey beard catching the morning light, his leather vest covered in patches that told stories of Iraq, Brotherhood, and a daughter named Sarah who died fighting the same battle Fiona was fighting now. He raised his hand for silence, and 80 engines cut off in perfect unison. Today we ride for Fiona Carter, 9 years old. Stage 3 leukemia. She asked us to ride past her house once. We're bringing 80 bikes, because when a kid fighting cancer asks for courage, we don't send half measures. We send the full force of this brotherhood. He paused. Chief Sullivan from Dearborn Heights PD will escort us. We ride silent until we reach Mayflower Street. No revving, no noise. Respectful. But when we get there, when Fiona sees us, we give her everything. 3 roars, synchronized, loud enough to shake the sky. Bear Johnson, the 6'5" VP, stepped forward. And if anyone asks why we're doing this, you tell them. Because she asked. And because we're Hell's Angels. And Hell's Angels don't abandon family. At 9:47 a.m., 80 motorcycles pulled out of the clubhouse parking lot in perfect V formation, engines rumbling low, moving through Detroit streets like a disciplined military convoy. Chief Tom Sullivan led in his patrol car, lights off, radio silent, because this wasn't about law enforcement, it was about escorting courage. They rode down Woodward Avenue, through downtown Detroit where office workers stopped on sidewalks to stare, through residential neighborhoods where families came out on porches, cameras raised, wondering what was happening. No one revved engines, no one showboated. This was sacred. At 10:03 a.m., they turned onto Mayflower Street in Dearborn Heights, and the sound, even at idle, was thunder rolling through a quiet suburb that had never heard anything like it. Windows rattled, car alarms triggered, dogs barked, and neighbors poured out of their houses, some terrified, some confused, most with phones recording because whatever was about to happen, they wanted proof it was real. Fiona Carter stood at her living room window, too weak to go outside yet, her face pressed against the glass, and when she saw the first motorcycle turn the corner, then the second, then the 10th, then the 20th, then more and more, until 80 bikes lined both sides of Mayflower Street in perfect formation, she screamed, "Mom, Mom, they came, they really came!" Mrs. Penelope Carter ran to the window, saw 80 Hells Angels dismounting in unison, standing at attention beside their bikes, leather cuts gleaming, American flags waving in the October breeze, and she collapsed against the wall sobbing because her daughter, her dying daughter, had asked for one motorcycle and been answered by an army. Mrs. Henderson stood on her lawn holding a handmade sign. "Thank you, Hells Angels, Thor." Mr. Patterson, the retired cop from 3 doors down, saluted. A young mother with 2 toddlers held up her phone, tears streaming, and Chief Tom Sullivan stepped out of his patrol car, removed his hat, and stood at attention, because this wasn't about law enforcement or motorcycle clubs, it was about humanity showing up when innocence asked for courage. Rufus walked to Fiona's front door and knocked. Penelope answered, tears streaming. "Is she ready?" "She can barely stand," Penelope whispered, "but she wants to come outside." "Then let's bring her out." Penelope carried Fiona, 73 pounds of girl wrapped in a pink hoodie, bald head, IV port scar, clutching her little angel patch out onto the porch. And when Fiona saw 80 bikers standing at attention, engines idling, waiting for her, she burst into tears and screamed the words Rufus would remember for the rest of his life. "You came for me. All of you came for me." Rufus McKenna had seen a lot of things in 52 years combat in Fallujah, bar fights that sent men to hospitals, his 7-year-old daughter Sarah dying in a hospital bed from the same leukemia that was killing Fiona Carter, but standing on a Dearborn Heights porch, watching a 9-year-old cancer patient realize that 80 Hells Angels had shut down her entire street just because she'd asked them to ride past her house once, broke something open in his chest that he'd kept locked since Sarah died. And when Fiona screamed, "You came for me," through tears that mixed with the October sunlight, Rufus walked to her slowly, removed his sunglasses so she could see his eyes, and knelt on one knee so they were face to face, this massive biker and this tiny girl, and said words that would echo across America when the video went viral 6 hours later. "You asked for one bike, Fiona. We brought 80, because you're brave. And brave people don't fight alone, they fight with an army behind them. And sweetheart, this army, we're yours now. Forever." Fiona couldn't speak. She just sobbed and reached out with trembling arms. And Rufus, this hardened road captain who'd been shot at in Iraq and stabbed in a Detroit alley, gently hugged a dying child and whispered something only she could hear. "My daughter Sarah had cancer too. She didn't make it. But she told me before she died that I should help other kids who are fighting. So I'm here because of her, and I'm here because of you, and we're not leaving until you know you're not alone." Mrs. Penelope Carter stood on the porch, one hand over her mouth, sobbing as neighbors surrounded the house with cameras and signs and tears. Mrs. Henderson's sign, "Thank you, Hells Angels, Thor." Mr. Patterson's sign, "Respect," with an American flag. Bear Johnson, the 6'5" VP with the prosthetic hand, stepped forward carrying something wrapped in pink tissue paper. "Fiona, we brought you something." He unwrapped it carefully, a custom leather vest, child-sized, with Hells Angels patches and a special rocker that read, "Little Angel, Fiona." On the front, embroidered carefully, Sarah's legacy. Fiona took the vest with shaking hands. I can wear this? You earned it, Bear said. You showed more courage writing that letter than most people show in a lifetime. Stitch Martinez, the medic, knelt beside Rufus. Fiona, I'm a medic. I've worked with a lot of sick kids. And I want you to know something. Cancer doesn't define you. Fighting does. And you're a fighter. He handed her a small leather patch with a pink ribbon. This is for you. It says warrior, because that's what you are. Then Rufus stood, turned to face the 80 bikers standing at attention, and raised his hand. On my command, engines, 80 hands moved to ignition switches. The street went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Rufus looked at Fiona. You asked to hear the engines, sweetheart. You ready? Fiona nodded, her eyes wide. Rufus's voice carried across Mayflower Street like a battlefield command. Rev! 80 engines roared in perfect unison, a sound like jet fighters taking off, like thunder trapped in exhaust pipes, like the voice of God announcing that this child matters, that her fight matters, that she is seen and heard and valued. The sound shook windows, rattled doors, vibrated through bones and hearts. Neighbors screamed in joy. Children covered their ears and laughed. Mrs. Henderson wept. Chief Sullivan saluted. And Fiona, 9-year-old Fiona Carter, who'd been told she might not live to see Christmas, threw her hands in the air and screamed with pure, unfiltered joy. Again, do it again! Rufus laughed through tears. You heard her. Rev. They did it 2 more times. 3 thunderous roars that echoed across Dearborn Heights, across Detroit, across America, as videos flooded social media with the caption, 80 Hells Angels shut down street for cancer fighting girl. By 10:47 a.m., local news vans had arrived. Reporter Sarah Mitchell from Channel 7 approached Rufus with a microphone. Why did you do this? Rufus looked at Fiona, still clutching her little angel vest, still crying with joy. Because she asked, and because when a 9-year-old fighting cancer asks for courage, you bring it, all of it. The reporter turned to the neighbors. Were you scared when you saw 80 motorcycles coming? Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. I was terrified, until I realized they weren't here to scare us. They were here to save a little girl's spirit, and now I'm ashamed I ever judged them. The story went viral within hours. Number Fiona's Army trended nationally. Comments flooded in. This is what real men look like. Hell's Angels proving stereotypes wrong. I'm crying at my desk. But also hate. Using a sick kid for PR. Bikers are criminals. And then the responses from cancer survivors, military veterans, parents of sick children. My daughter died of leukemia. I wish someone had done this for her. These men are heroes. By midnight, Fiona's letter had been shared 400,000 times, and Rufus sat in his clubhouse office, staring at his phone, reading messages from families across America, asking if the Hells Angels could help their sick children too. And he realized, today wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The video of 80 Hells Angels revving their engines for 9-year-old Fiona Carter went viral so fast that by Sunday morning, less than 24 hours after Rufus McKenna and his Brotherhood shut down, Mayflower Street in Dearborn Heights news outlets from CNN to Fox to the BBC were running the story with headlines like Bikers Bring Hope to Cancer Patient and Hells Angels Shut Down Detroit Street to Honor Sick Girl. And while America debated whether motorcycle clubs were heroes or criminals using a sick child for publicity, something far more important was happening inside the Carter house, where Fiona sat at the kitchen table wearing her little angel vest, eating scrambled eggs for the first time in 3 days, and telling her mother with a smile that made Penelope cry, "Mom, I feel brave now. I think I can keep fighting." And that not the viral videos, not the news coverage, not the trending hashtags was the point. Because courage isn't about motorcycles or leather vests or 80 engines roaring in unison. It's about knowing you're not alone. And for the first time since her diagnosis 8 months ago, Fiona believed she wasn't alone. She had an army, But what neither Fiona nor Penelope knew was that the Hells Angels weren't done. They were just getting started. Sunday afternoon, Rufus's phone rang. "Unknown number," he answered. "McKenna. Mr. McKenna, this is Dr. Rachel Okonkwo from Children's Hospital of Michigan Oncology Department. I'm Fiona Carter's primary oncologist." Rufus sat up straight. "Is she okay?" "She's stable, but I'm calling because something remarkable happened." After yesterday's event, Fiona's spirits improved dramatically. Her appetite returned, her pain levels decreased, and this morning her latest blood work showed her white cell count is the highest it's been in 2 months. Rufus's throat tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means hope matters, Mr. McKenna. It means when patients, especially children, have something to fight for, their bodies respond. Fiona has been asking about you, about when you're coming back. She wants to show you something." "What?" "Her hair. It's starting to grow back. Just fuzz, but she's so proud of it." Rufus closed his eyes. "We'll be there tomorrow. There's one more thing. We have 17 other pediatric cancer patients in our ward. Many of them saw the videos. They're asking if the Hells Angels would visit them too." Rufus didn't hesitate. "Every Monday, we'll rotate brothers. No kid fights alone." Monday at 4 p.m., Rufus, Bear, and Stitch walked into Children's Hospital of Michigan Oncology Ward, carrying bags of toys, motorcycles, stuffed animals, art supplies. Nurses watched nervously as 3 massive bikers in leather cuts moved through the ward. But within minutes, those same nurses were crying as they watched Bear lift a 6-year-old boy with brain cancer onto his lap and tell him stories about riding motorcycles across America. Fiona was in room 407, and when Rufus walked in, she screamed and ran to him. Actually ran, which Penelope said she hadn't done in weeks. "Rufus, look!" She pulled off her pink beanie. Tiny blonde fuzz covered her scalp. "It's growing back." Rufus knelt, touched her head gently. "You're a warrior, Fiona. I told you. Will you come back? Every week, I promise." Over the next month, the Hells Angels Detroit chapter established a rotating schedule. 2 bikers visited the Children's Hospital every Monday, bringing toys, telling stories, being present. They didn't cure cancer, but they gave kids something to fight for, and that mattered. Donations flooded in from across America. Strangers sent money to the Detroit chapter with notes for Fiona and kids like her. By Thanksgiving, they'd raised $87,000. Rufus established Fiona's Courage Fund to help families with medical bills, travel expenses, anything they needed. On Thanksgiving Day, the Hells Angels delivered full turkey dinners to 15 families with children fighting cancer. Fiona's family was first. Rufus carried the turkey personally. "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart." Fiona hugged him so tight he could barely breathe. "You're like my dad now." Rufus's voice broke. "I'd be honored." Penelope pulled him aside. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank Fiona. She wrote a letter asking for courage. She gave us purpose." That night, Rufus sat alone in his clubhouse office, staring at a photo of Sarah, his daughter who died 15 years ago, and whispered, "I'm keeping my promise, baby girl. I'm helping them, just like I said I would." And for the first time since Sarah died, Rufus McKenna felt peace. But the story wasn't over, because in early December, Fiona's cancer came back. The doctors called it a relapse, aggressive. The treatments weren't working. They gave her weeks, maybe a month. And when Rufus got the call from Penelope, his world shattered. "She's asking for you," Penelope sobbed. "She wants to say goodbye." Rufus hung up, stared at the wall, and made a decision. If Fiona was going to die, she wasn't going to die in a hospital. She was going to die knowing she was loved. When Penelope Carter called Rufus McKenna in early December to say that Fiona's leukemia had returned aggressively and the doctors were out of options, when she said through sobs that her 9-year-old daughter had weeks, maybe a month, and was asking to see Rufus one more time to say goodbye. Rufus sat in the Detroit clubhouse office, holding a phone that felt heavier than any weapon he'd carried in Iraq, staring at the photo of his daughter Sarah, who died the same way, and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. If Fiona Carter was going to die, she wasn't going to die alone in a sterile hospital room surrounded by beeping machines and fluorescent lights. She was going to die knowing she was loved, protected, and honored by 80 bikers who'd promised her an army and meant it. He called an emergency chapter meeting. 40 Detroit Hells Angels showed up within the hour, and when Rufus told them Fiona was dying, that the cancer had won, that the little girl who'd written them a crayon letter asking to hear engines was running out of time, the room went silent in the way that happens when warriors realize they can't fight the enemy, when all you can do is stand beside someone and make sure they don't face the darkness alone. Bear Johnson stood first. What does she need? Rufus's voice was raw. She needs to know she mattered. She needs to know her fight wasn't for nothing. Stitch Martinez, the medic who'd spent 2 tours in Afghanistan watching soldiers die, said quietly, "Then we make her last days count. We give her everything." Over the next week, the Hells Angels did something unprecedented. They coordinated with Children's Hospital to transform Fiona's room into something magical: motorcycle posters on walls, her little angel vest displayed on a stand, a sound system playing engine noises when she wanted, and most importantly, a rotating schedule of bikers visiting every single day, so she was never alone. Rufus moved into the hospital, not officially, but the nurses stopped asking him to leave because they'd seen what happened when he sat beside Fiona's bed and told her stories about Sarah, about Brotherhood, about how dying doesn't make you weak. It just means you fought as hard as you could, and now it's time to rest. On December 10th, Fiona's breathing became labored. Doctors said hours, maybe a day. Penelope called Rufus, who was already there. She wants to see the bikes one more time. Rufus looked out the 4th-floor window at the parking lot below. Then he made a phone call. 30 minutes later, 80 motorcycles pulled into the Children's Hospital parking lot, lining up in perfect formation beneath Fiona's window. Nurses wheeled her bed to the window so she could see. And when she saw them, 80 Hells Angels standing at attention, engines idling, she smiled through tears. They came again. "They'll always come," Rufus whispered. "That's what family does." At 11:47 p.m. on December 11th, with her mother holding one hand and Rufus holding the other, Fiona Carter stopped breathing. She was 9 years old. She'd fought stage 3 leukemia for 11 months. She'd asked the Hells Angels to ride past her house once, and they'd brought her an army. She died wearing her little angel vest, surrounded by people who loved her, knowing she'd mattered. The funeral was held at Sacred Heart Church in Dearborn Heights on December 15th. 80 Hells Angels stood outside in full dress code, forming an honor guard as Fiona's tiny casket was carried in. Rufus delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking. "Fiona taught us that courage isn't about winning, it's about fighting even when you know you might lose. She taught us that asking for help isn't weakness, it's bravery. And she taught us that family isn't blood, it's who shows up." At the cemetery, as Fiona was laid to rest, 80 engines roared 3 times in synchronized tribute. Neighbors who'd feared those same bikers 4 months ago now stood with tears streaming, holding signs. "Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Hells Angels." Mrs. Henderson placed flowers on the grave. Chief Sullivan saluted, and Rufus knelt beside the grave, placed Sarah's photo next to Fiona's headstone, and whispered, "You're together now, both my girls. Tell her I kept my promise." The video of the funeral went viral. Number Fiona's army became Number Fiona's legacy. Donations flooded in. By Christmas, Fiona's Courage Fund had raised $340,000. The Hells Angels used it to help 19 other families with children fighting cancer. They paid medical bills, they provided housing, they showed up. And every Monday, 2 bikers visited the children's hospital, just like they'd promised, because Fiona had asked them to be strong, and they were honoring that request. In January, the Michigan State Legislature passed a resolution honoring the Hells Angels Detroit chapter for extraordinary service to pediatric cancer patients. Rufus accepted the award wearing Fiona's little angel patch on his vest. In his speech he said, "We're not heroes. We're just men who answered a letter from a brave little girl. She's the hero. We're just trying to live up to her example." By March, 20 Hells Angels chapters across America had started similar programs. The Brotherhood was showing up for sick kids everywhere. And it all started because a 9-year-old girl in Detroit wrote a crayon letter asking if they'd ride past her house once. They'd brought 80 bikes and changed everything. 6 months after Fiona Carter was buried at Sacred Heart Cemetery in Dearborn Heights with 80 Hells Angels engines, roaring tribute, and a nation watching through viral videos that proved motorcycle clubs weren't the monsters, society painted them as but protectors who showed up when innocence asked for courage. Rufus Red Wolf McKenna stood in the same Children's Hospital of Michigan oncology ward where he'd held Fiona's hand as she died, watching a 7-year-old boy named Marcus, who'd just been diagnosed with leukemia, stare wide-eyed at the motorcycle patches on Rufus's vest and ask the same question Fiona had asked months ago, "Are you really a Hells Angel?" And Rufus knelt, just like he'd knelt for Fiona, just like he'd knelt for his daughter Sarah 15 years ago, and said words that had become his mission, his redemption, his reason for living. "Yeah, buddy, I am. And you know what Hells Angels do? We protect kids who are fighting battles nobody should have to fight alone. So if you're scared, if you're tired, if you don't think you can keep going, you call me. Because you've got an army now. And we don't leave our own behind." Marcus's mother, a single woman named Lisa, who looked as exhausted as Penelope had looked, burst into tears. "Why are you doing this?" Rufus pulled out a worn, crayon-drawn letter, Fiona's letter, which he carried everywhere now, and showed it to her. "Because a 9-year-old girl taught me that showing up matters more than anything else, so we show up." And as Rufus left the hospital that day, he didn't know that Marcus would survive, would go into remission, would graduate high school wearing his own little angel patch, would become a pediatric oncologist specifically because a biker showed up when he was scared. He didn't know the legacy yet, but he knew this. Fiona's letter had changed everything. Every year, on December 11th, the anniversary of Fiona's death, 80 Hells Angels ride to Sacred Heart Cemetery in Dearborn Heights, where a pink headstone reads, "Fiona Carter, age 9, little angel. She asked for 1 bike. We brought an army." They stand in silence, rev engines 3 times, and leave flowers, toys, letters from sick kids across America who'd been inspired by her story. Mrs. Penelope Carter is always there. So is Mrs. Henderson. So is Chief Sullivan. So are neighbors who'd been terrified of bikers until they saw what real strength looks like. In 2027, 2 years after Fiona's death, the Hells Angels established the Fiona's Courage National Foundation, supporting pediatric cancer research and family assistance programs. By 2030, they'd raised $4.7 million. 43 children's hospitals across America had partnered with local motorcycle clubs to provide support for sick kids. The model worked. Kids fought harder when they knew they weren't alone. Survival rates improved when hope was present. And the Bikers Men's Society had dismissed as criminals and outlaws found redemption in showing up for the most vulnerable among us. Rufus turned 62 in 2035. He'd been visiting sick kids for 10 years. He'd held the hands of children who survived and children who didn't. He'd cried more in those 10 years than in his entire life before, but he'd also smiled more, because every time a kid asked, "Are you really a Hells Angel?" and he said yes, and they lit up with hope, he saw Fiona, he saw Sarah, he saw purpose. One afternoon, in June 2035, Rufus got a call from an unknown number. "Mr. McKenna, this is Dr. Marcus Williams. I'm a pediatric oncologist at Children's Hospital. I don't know if you remember me, but you visited me when I was 7. I had leukemia. You gave me a little angel patch and told me I wasn't alone." Rufus sat down slowly. "Marcus? Yeah, I survived, and I became a doctor because of you, because you showed up when I was scared. And I wanted to call and say thank you, and to tell you that I'm starting a program here bringing bikers into the hospital weekly to mentor kids. I'm calling it Fiona's Army, and I want you to lead it." Rufus couldn't speak. Finally, "I'd be honored." "Good. Because there's a 6-year-old girl in room 407 who just got diagnosed. Her name is Emma, and she's asking if someone can make her feel brave." Rufus hung up, stared at the photo on his desk. Fiona, holding her "thank you" sign, surrounded by 80 motorcycles, smiling despite cancer ravaging her body. And he whispered, "We're still fighting for you, sweetheart. We'll never stop." Because that's what Fiona Carter taught America in 2024 when she wrote a crayon letter to the Hells Angels asking if they'd ride past her house just once to make her feel brave. She taught us that courage doesn't require winning, just fighting. That asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That family isn't blood, it's who shows up when you need them most. And that sometimes the people the world tells you to fear are the ones who'll move heaven and earth to protect you. Fiona asked for one bike. They brought 80. She asked to hear engines once. They came back every week until she died. She asked to feel brave. They gave her an army, and that army, 80 Hells Angels who shut down a street in Dearborn Heights on an October morning, is still riding, still showing up, still honoring the little girl who taught them that the strongest thing you can do isn't build walls or throw punches or prove how tough you are. It's kneel beside a dying child and promise them they're not alone. Fiona's gone, but her legacy, her courage, her letter, her army rides on forever. If you believe that Fiona Carter, with odds stacked against her, showed more courage, then like and share this story. Subscribe now for more stories like this. And check out the 2 videos showing on your screen right now, specially crafted for you. Until next time, ride with honor.